Welcome again. Everyone on here. Good. You want to take a moment just to stretch, relax a little bit. Close to 30 people here, so let's see how many we have online. Let's Clyde, put your glasses on. 19 people here this time. Good. Welcome, everyone. Especially welcome to all the new people that are here. It's good to see new faces, and it's good to see some people we haven't seen in a couple years in their faces, you know, right, in person. Glad to see you here. That's great. So anyway, let me get my stuff together. Tonight I'm going to be working, the title of the talk is Working with Our Thoughts. And this is one of the things that is a daily challenge when we work with our thoughts. And tonight I'm going to kind of go over like what is a thought, or what in the terms of the teaching, what do they mean by thought? And we're going to look at why it's important. And then we're going to look at the teachings as to what are some of the ways to work with them. And then I'm going to give you some of the ways I work with them. And working with thoughts on a daily basis. So with that, Don Juan, who was an Indian shaman, explained to his disciple, Carlos Castaneda, some of you may have read some of his work before, you talk to yourself too much. You're not unique in that. Every one of us does. We maintain our world with our inner dialogue. A man or woman of knowledge is aware that the world will change completely as soon as they stop talking to themselves. Now, wouldn't that be great if we could stop talking to ourselves, if we could stop this going on? Unfortunately, I don't think that's going to happen. And I don't know what eventually happened with that, but it would be nice if we could just stop talking to ourselves. But Ajahn Amaro, when he was looking at it, he said that he looked at it from this standpoint. He had to conclude that the act of thinking itself was not the problem. Rather, the suffering lay in the uncontrolled quality of thinking, where the mind is running and racing and just chattering away. Does anyone have that issue with their mind racing and running and chattering away like that? Okay, so that's it. It's not thinking. And he explains in the teachings how a thought, what is a thought? And a thought is he came to the conclusion the mind is not constantly thinking. Thinking is a highly conditioned activity. Just like when we talk about in here, everything is conditioned. Thoughts, just like sound is conditioned, sight is conditioned, our bodies are conditioned, everything's conditioned, thoughts are conditioned. We come in contact with an object, with things, with an object in the world or our own thoughts. And you know, in our teachings that thoughts are considered sins, just like I see something, I come in contact with it. If I hear something, I come in contact with it. If I taste something, I come in contact with it. Same thing as a thought. I come in contact with that thought. Each moment of such contact is accompanied by a feeling which is pleasant, unpleasant, or neutral. That's Vedana. Okay? But then what happens is that once we've come in contact with it, memory comes in and goes, anything that's kind of cognized or perceived, the mind names it, our memory names it. That's the sound of a dog. That's the thought of, that's the taste of something. There is a raw sensing of a stimulus, and then our memory moves in and names it. Conceptual thought begins to cluster around that naming. That is, that which we name, we then think about. This is called the taka. We may think, I wonder who owns that dog. Is that the same dog I saw yesterday? What's my dog doing right now? Then the taka takes off. It blossoms in what is known as papancha. We talked about that in papancha. This is conceptual proliferation. This is where the mind's chattering away and going and going and going, stories that we have. It is the mass of thoughts and conceptions which burden the heart and mind. So this is from Ajay Amare. So this is a thought. This is what thoughts are conditioned. They come up. They're conditioned by something. So why are they important? Why is it important that we have to work with thoughts? And I was thinking about this, and if you look at where the Buddha starts talking about thoughts, we have the Four Noble Truths. There's suffering or unsatisfactoriness. There's a cause of that is clinging. There's a way out of that, the letting go. And how we do this is through the fourth noble, the Noble Eightfold Path. That's how we do it. All right, we keep looking down in that. We got the first two are right intention, right view, and then right intention. Then the next three, right speech, right action, right livelihood, are more your ethical things that are more physical, livelihood, speech, this type of thing. Then he gets into the last three steps are what they call the mental concepts. And the very first one is right effort. And this deals with thoughts. And I thought, well, the Buddha was pretty smart because he knew once we started sitting in meditation and trying to get in concentration, these thoughts were going to be a problem. So right effort is about dealing with thoughts. And it's actually dealing with wholesome and unwholesome thoughts. And I'm just going to take a moment with that. Wholesome, we got to go back to our good old friends, the defilements, greed, hate, and delusion. If we have any actions or thoughts that come out of greed, hate, and delusion are unwholesome, and they're going to create more suffering for ourselves and others. If anything comes out of kind of the opposite of those, the wholesome thoughts, actions, generosity, loving kindness, these forgiveness, all these things, compassion, these are wholesome thoughts, and things come out of that create less suffering. So that's why it's important, this whole thing of wholesome and unwholesome. But in this case, in right effort, he calls they call it the four great endeavors. And this is the sixth noble truth. It says, it was four great endeavors. One, to prevent the arising of unarisen, unwholesome thoughts. In other words, we don't want any unwholesome thoughts to come up. The second one, to abandon unwholesome states that have already arisen, to arouse wholesome states that have not yet arisen, and to maintain and perfect wholesome states already arisen. Basically, this means we just want to be able to get ourselves into a state of wholesome states. That's what it is. But what we're going to be talking about today are this number two, to abandon unwholesome states that have already arisen. These are if they come from thoughts. And that's what I'll be talking about. Because that's important, because as soon as we sit in meditation, thoughts start coming up. If I'm out in the supermarket, thoughts come up. Odd things come up. I'm driving the car, odd things come up. So he knew that it was important that we need to have a way of working with these thoughts. And Jack Kornfield's teacher said, thoughts make a good servant, but a poor master. And so then we go on. If we go into the teachings a little bit deeper, they actually gave us some ways of how we deal with these. Now, what I'm going to be talking about here is the teachings that are taught to, the monks and people in monasteries, but we can also use it as lay people. And then I'll be explaining later on how I use some of this in day-to-day life in doing this. And these are the 5 ways of doing this. And last week, Larry spoke about these. He mentioned these, Shaila's Catherine's book on these intrusions into our minds, these distractions, and the 5 ways we do this. So I'm going to go over those very briefly, the 5 ways that the teachings tell us. The first method, one tries to replace harmful thoughts by their beneficial opposites. The discourse gives a simile of a carpenter removing a coarse peg with the help of a fine peg. So if I'm thinking anger about something, I may want to turn around and do loving kindness. If I'm thinking of greed, I may want to turn around, well, let me do something with generosity. So we want to do the opposite of that. If I'm thinking hatred, I want to do some harmlessness. If I'm thinking about me as the world around circling about I may want to say, well, wait a minute, this is a bigger world than that. So that's replacing that. And unsolved thoughts for desire is the impurity of the body. There's different ways. They give you some more different ways of doing that. And even I put in here, even yourself, even if you're beating yourself up with thoughts, you think of your good qualities. If you're sitting there thinking about yourself, well, think of your good qualities. Replace those thoughts if you could do that. So that's the first way, kind of thought replacement. The second method is to evoke the repugnance and the sense of danger with regard to them. The simile in the discourse is that of a well-dressed young man or woman who feels horrified, humiliated, and disgusted when the carcass of an animal is slung around his or her neck. The idea here is you're thinking something bad. It's the idea you just start thinking, well, this is not good, this is horrible, this is going to create suffering. That one's a little bit harder to do, but a sense of dread. And then you can kind of, if you get that sense of dread, then you can start looking for these good thoughts and start replacing the good thoughts. The third way is to ignore undesirable thoughts by diverting one's attention. And this one I use a good bit. The simile is that they use as closing one's eyes at a disagreeable sight or looking in another direction. In day-to-day life, or if you're out doing something, sometimes you can replace, sometimes you just redirect that thought. If I'm thinking something, so let me go dig in the dirt, or let me go think about this, or go read something. They say read something, or something to distract the mind. I think we've all done this to a certain degree. If you're caught up in a thought, well, let me just go focus on something different. It could be physical, to stop. What we're talking about, we're stopping that train of thought, that papancha. We're trying to stop that train of thought because it's going to lead to suffering. Reciting or reading may be helpful outside the meditation practice when we're not in the cushion. So that redirecting one's attention. The fourth method is kind of hard to do. This has to do with, and I've done it though, but it's called tracing the thought back. Like once I particularly this in meditation, or I'll sit there and go like, I'm thinking about something, and go like, how did I get here? And I go back, well, that thought before, what was I thinking about before? What was I thinking about before? What was I thinking about before? If you get down to what triggered it, that might have been a thought of greed or delusion or something, and I can like work with that. And I've done that sometimes. I'm thinking about this, but how did it get here? And it goes, and all of a sudden you're like, well, it might have been that sound. I heard that sound and it went all the way back to, and it was just a sound. So it's thinking back. That one's a little bit harder. And the fifth one is hard too. The fifth one is that of vigorous suppression. When they get really, really strong and unmanageable, the simile is that it's a strong-bodied man forcing down a weaker person by sheer physical strength. And that one's hard to do, but I do have another way of doing it. I'll show an easier way to do it. Now, a caveat to all this, these are thoughts that we have like day to day. These are not real serious mental thoughts. To get to that, these are to help us in our, average day. Everybody has these kind of thoughts and works with these. If you get serious thoughts, then you need to do a little bit more seeking help. So the teachings give us ways to work with this. But I don't sit there and go, there's a thought, which one of these things am I going to work with? I have my own way of doing this. So I'm going to tell you a little bit how I'd work with some of these thoughts. First thing I came up with is that most thoughts are good. Most thoughts that we have during the day are pretty useful. They're beneficial. They could be creative. They could remind us to do something. They could be pleasant. So most thoughts are pretty good. And like I said, the right effort piece is about unwholesome thoughts. But I like to look at thoughts that are causing me suffering, whatever that is. And I came up with the second conclusion, I'm not going to stop thinking, no matter what this guy says. It's just going to happen. We're human. That's what the mind does. That's what it wants to do. It's going to think. So the first thing I do is I try to be mindful. I always come back to I'm mindful that I'm caught up in this thinking. Jack Kornfield says, thoughts are often one-sided and untrue. Learn to be mindful of thought instead of being lost in thought. There's that old bumper sticker, don't believe everything you think. But we have to be mindful, first of all, that I'm doing this. Usually I'm ruminating over something, and I'm finding that I'm caught up in this thought, and I'm ruminating over this, and sometimes it can bring up old memories, it can bring up old hurts, it can bring up old thoughts, things that I've thought about before. But I go, okay, wait a minute, I'm caught up in this. I'm caught up in this mindful thing, this rumination, this thought. And I can see it's not very useful right now. The second thing I like to do is to notice, am I suffering? I'm sitting here, I'm ruminating over this, am I suffering? And some of that can be just, am I doing? Where is that in my body? What is that negative feeling? I can get caught up in loneliness or sadness sometimes. Well, this loneliness, there's sadness here. And of course, it's always been here, and it's always going to be here. It's never going to go away. It could be fear, it could be anger, if you're caught up in anger. So I want to notice if I'm suffering right now. And it may be I'm in a fantasy of some type, thinking of a fantasy, like lust or greed. And you think, well, that's not suffering. Well, let me find out that's never going to happen. Then you're back down to this. Well, now it's poor me. It's never going to happen. Rumi says, look past your thoughts so that you can discover the nectar of this moment. So I want to see if I'm suffering. Then I begin, at this point, this is all real quickly, but I begin to look at the process of thinking versus the content of thinking. I'm looking at things like, where did this thought come from? And that may be where I trace back to where it came from. Where did this thought come from? Did I choose this thought? An example of that would be, I'm in the car, driving down there, and if I've thought anything political, I find myself angry. And all of a sudden I'm angry, and I'm going down thinking about all this stuff, angry, and then I go, wait a minute. Where did this come from? I've gotten up in the morning, I have bad moods. I wake up in the morning, I'm in a bad mood. And I know I'm in a bad mood. I didn't wake up to be in a bad mood and say, oh, I'm going to be in a bad mood today. It's just here. And I have to realize that, okay, it's here. I didn't choose it, but it's here. And I'm not going to push it away. But I'm not going to try to hold on to it either. But I can be with it. And this is hard to do. Thoughts think themselves, they're not bad, it's simply what the mind does. I think that I have to remember thoughts are conditioned, just like Ajahn Amaro said, and they're impermanent. I know my bad mood is going to go away. That helps it right there. It may not go away right then, but it's going to go away because it's impermanent. This feeling of sadness, this feeling of anger, guilt, whatever it is, it's impermanent. Everything's impermanent. It's going to rise and pass away. How long it hangs around may vary, but it's impermanent. I like to see if there's a theme in my thoughts. And my thoughts typically are self-righteous anger. I can see it and I'll go, there it is again. There's that self-righteous anger again. I even go to the point sometimes where I go like, that's self-righteous anger thinking. That's not me thinking, that's self-righteous anger thinking. That could be anger thinking. That could be grief thinking. That could be lust, greed thinking. We all probably have something that we catch a hold to. Mine, like I said, why don't these people think like I do? Why this stupid person in front of me do this? I know the right way to do this. That comes up, and that is my self-righteous anger coming to visit me again. And if I can see it as that, I'm not caught up in it. All this is, there was a teacher at one of my things out at South, the retreats out at Spirit Rock, and she describes it this way: you're sitting at the train station, and thoughts are like trains that keep coming by, and you just have to figure out which one you want to get on. Most of the time, we just take the next one, not knowing where it's going. The next thing you know, you end up over here. So part of being mindful is being like, which train do I want to get on? Okay, so I'm kind of doing this thought. Where did this come from? Where did it come from? There it is again. Okay, there's my greed thinking again. And what it's doing is it's stopping this papancha keep going. We're breaking this train thoughts. And the couple of things I do is I focus, I can always, and this is the one I talked about, kind of the aggressive one. I'm not struggling down, but coming back to the breath or the body is a great way to help stop this thinking. Let me come back and focus on my breath. Or what is this moment like right now? This moment. You know, I might have been in a bad mood, I might have been angry, I might have said, what's going on right now? In this moment, there's a breath coming in, there's a breath going out, there's my feet on the floor, I've grounded myself, and when I'm in this moment, no matter what I was thinking, where I was, come back to this moment. That's what I call my aggressive stance. It's just coming back to this moment, being in this body and being here. And then the last thing that I do, or try to do with this, is I don't judge myself. I don't judge myself for having that thought arising. I'm not a bad person because I got angry. I'm not a bad person because I thought a bad thing about somebody. I wanted this person to go jump off a cliff or something, okay? I didn't intend to think that, but I don't want to say the mind thinks it's going to do that. So judgment, I have to be aware of that. I have to be aware that this is what's happened. I'm working with this thought, and I'm not a bad person for that. So I don't want to be judging myself, because that just adds more to it. That just creates more suffering than what you're already doing. Okay, so those are some of the ways I work with it. We all have thoughts. I'm not going to stop my thinking. It's this idea of, like our John Amaray said, it's our relationship to our thoughts and how we can work with those to end our suffering, to work with those. The mind is going to think. We're stimulated. We are in the world. We're not out in a monastery somewhere. We're going to interact. We're going to have all these interactions, the stimulations to the mind, the thoughts, the TV, the social media. Everything's going to trigger these thoughts. And then it's how we do work with them is just to be mindful of them and how we work with them. And we have to have these tools to work with them. So be mindful of them. And then Rumi says, and this is his great classic quote, "This being human form is a great house. Every morning a new arrival, a joy, a depression, a meanness, some momentary awareness comes as an welcome and entertain them all."